So when you get ready to change the shocks, what you're going to want to do is jack it up by the rear end itself. And then once you get it jacked up, go ahead and set some jack stands in place. Set the axle down on the jack stands. Don't put the jack stands on the frame. The reason being is with the shock is actually what keeps the axle from going all the way down. So if you support off the frame and let the axle drop all the way, you're going to have to get the jack in place in order to lift up the axle in order to be able to get the shock on. So just jack it up by the axle, set it on some jack stands, and then we'll proceed to take the shocks off. These are bolts on this shock, not nuts. And for whatever reason they don't come with hardware, so retain all your hardware that comes off of it. Rubber stuck on it. Okay, in order to remove the shock, and I'll get into the jacking in a minute, but you're going to want to jack up by the bottom arm. Because as I mentioned for the rear shocks, if the suspension drops all the way to the bottom, the shock is what's actually causing the stop. So if you, what I guess I'm trying to say is, if the suspension's all the way dropped freely to its stop, it's the shock that's stopping it, front or rear. So that means trying to get the bolts loose is going to put it under a strain, and it's going to make it, and once you get it broke free, then it's going to drop down even further than you want it to. It could even cause damages. So you want to support either the rear end, in this case you're going to want to support the control arm, and let the spring weight hold it up and not use the shock as a stop. Now you can work around this, but in order for this video I'm going to just remove this to show you. This clip, for whatever reason, come around it. These things, if you could get an impact gun on top of the nut there, if you can get an impact gun on top of the nut, you could probably just zing it loose, but you're not going to be able to. And most people don't realize, but shock absorbers, the stem that's sticking out has got a shape to it. Well, that shape actually is for a socket. And the way you work this in order to get it off, I put some penetrating oil on the threads. And I've already broke this free, but it's just to demonstrate what I did is I put a wrench on the nut. And I'm going to put the socket on top. And you may be confused, but the ratchet, and if you don't have an air ratchet, just use a regular ratchet, but it's on tighten. So that'll run the shaft in the direction to loosen it. So and that takes the top nut loose. Save your hardware, because sometimes replacement shock absorbers do not come with them, and they're supposed to, but you hope so, because these bushings get worn out. I mean, this bushing's about had it, it's shot. And the original shocks, most of them are not gas charged. They were in this older time, so it's going to make it easier. Our next step is going to be able to get these two bolts at the bottom free. Now, I can't get below it enough to show you the two bolts, and you're just going to have to look from beneath, but you can see right here, this is the top of, or the threaded part of the bolt sticking from the bottom up. So we're going to have to go on the bottom of the control arm and take these two bolts off. Okay, you might think the shock will drop out the hole in the bottom, but what you're going to have to do, it's going to be hard to get it on the camera, just turn it till you can pull, because these are through the bottom. They come up to the bottom, but the shock won't drop out the bottom. So you have to turn it, wiggle it, and let it come out the top. Then putting it together would be just the reverse order. This is the new shock. It's gas charge. KYBs, they're great. Now, what you're going to want to do yourself a favor is looking at the bottom. You want to look at the other shock and make sure these are turned about the same way. The reason being is the bolts are usually not real long, and if you put it up there and it's not close to the angle, it may be hard to get the bolt started. So just kind of make sure that, and they don't have to be exact, just make sure they're close, and you can adjust it with a pair of pliers. Same as before, it'll go in through the top, just reverse order of taking it apart. Just now the shock being gas charged is fully extended, so it's going to make it a little more fun to get it in with it, hitting everything. Yeah, you got to compress the shock in order to get it to work. And it came with new hardware. I'll have to let it down for a minute. I'm going to put the two bottom bolts in or get them started. And then we'll put the top part on. And luckily, it came with brand new hardware. All shocks of this type should come with hardware. Rear shocks don't always, but the fronts should. And if you get confused on how the washers go on this shaft, just look at your old one, how it was. These washers have an actual ledge on it, and that's what's going to line up here to keep it straight. So on this one, on the bottom shaft here, it's going to point up. So now we can put the they got that kind of centered away. We can go ahead and put the two bolts in at the bottom. And you'll have to compress the shock a little bit with your hand. It's best not to tighten any of your bolts down until you know everything's lined up. So you put them in with your fingers, kind of get them ready to go, but then once you get everything lined up, then you can start tightening things down. See, this one doesn't have a lip on it. It's designed just to go over that rubber bushing. And then it comes with a nut. And screw down your fingers as tight as you can go. Now, back to the air ratchet in that I will put this socket, this special made socket, if you can see it. I'll put that down in the description. So now this case, it's going to be on loosen, and it'll tighten this up. So just it shoulders out, and you don't have to go ape on making it super tight. It comes with a lock nut, or usually they do. We'll have to get 2 wrenches to tighten that up, but and that's it. Now we got to tighten the 2 bottom bolts, and then your shock absorber's in. And if you're not going to do a video while you're doing this, it probably should take you the time to take the tire off and get the old one off, as long as you don't run into any, because sometimes trying to get the old one off, this shaft will break, which that's fine in this case, as long as it breaks where you take the shock off. You may have to sawzall it or whatever. It just depends on where it breaks. If it does, like I said, I recommend putting penetrating oil on it and let it sit for at least 15 minutes before you start. But the actual physical mechanic just doing the job should take you about 15-20 minutes tops to do a change out of shock absorber. And if you did a lot of them, you could probably do them in about 5 to 8 minutes.